Whitecap Resources stock is under a bit of pressure after it reported an unexpected loss in its first quarter. That's not dampening the outlook, though, for President and CEO Grant Fagerheim. There is one area of concern, though, for this energy producer, and that's the future of crude-by-rail under new Alberta Premier Jason Kenney. Thanks for being with us.
Oh, you're most welcome. Thank you.
So let's start with your optimism, because my understanding is that based on the outlook, you actually think 2019 will be a good year. What's driving that view?
So there's a couple of things that are driving that. Is that number one, WTI prices we've seen come from $49 in December to now trade between $63 to $64. That's a big lift, but more importantly, what we've seen is the differential pricing for light quality crude went from what was just over $26 in the fourth quarter to now the first quarter being under $5. And we continue in this range somewhere between around that $5 range for the balance of this year. We've also seen WCS come in from what was $38 to under $10. Mm-hmm. So the net effect price that Canadian producers are receiving for their product is exceptional.
And obviously, some of that, of course, due to supply shut-ins that were orchestrated by the last government. Crude by rail has been effective as well in getting your crude to market. Are you worried about Premier Kenney and his moves there?
No, I think that Premier Kenney, we're excited about some of the initiatives he has underway. I think he'll bring a balanced approach. I think that the crude by rail is really something that should be done by the private sector. And not specifically for the government to take on long-term commitments and financial commitments. The private sector has always done a better job at crude by rail. So for interim periods of time, I think it's important that they do use crude by rail, but I think you leave it back to the private sector or to the companies that are producing to make the decisions, and I think that's where Premier Kenney will go.
Do you also think that way about curtailment? Should the government stop intervening in production outputs?
Right at this particular time, I think curtailments work. I mean, what we've seen with curtailments, again, with the differentials that we were exposed to in the fourth quarter versus what we exposed to in the first quarter and right now, had we not done those curtailments, which we were supportive of, we would have seen a really desperate service sector business in Canada. And what we need is there's the producing community, there's what we'll call the midstream or pipe community, as well as the service sector. And the service sector, it's critically important that they remain healthy as well. If there was going to be these wide differentials as a result of not having sufficient pipe in Canada to move our product, we would have had very limited cash flow to put capital to work in the ground. So curtailments are working. And although there's different views from integrateds versus some of the other producers, mm-hmm. we believe that Premier Kenney would stay with that and should stay with that.
One other thing that Premier Kenney has done is taken a very tough stance on the pipeline issue, including threatening once again to so-called turn off the taps to British Columbia. Is that kind of rhetoric helpful? Do you worry in the industry that it just adds to the chill over investment there?
I don't. And the reason I don't is we needed someone to stand up for the Canadian energy space. The previous government were gentle. They were against the energy space up for the first 2.5 to 3 years. The last year leading into election, they changed their mind and thought they should be supportive of it. Jason Kenney will do what's right for Albertans. He'll do what's right for the energy sector. And he has a very keen eye on what's best for the Canadian economy. And if we don't have a strong Canadian energy space, we do not have a strong Canadian economy. So he has a view, I think a balanced view for moving our economy forward, definitely for moving Alberta forward, which I very much am in support of. But as far as the discussions on B12, moving products to British Columbia, we have to have people understand that we do need to get products to foreign markets, not just the United States of America.
So obviously getting pipelines built is central to that. There's also concern about the tanker ban. Are you optimistic that those things will be resolved in the near term?
I think with reasonable dialogue, that we can actually sit down and have a an educated conversation on this matter. I mean, the entire climate change discussion has become so divisive right across our country, and I think that reasonableness should prevail. As far as the tanker ban, we have 1,400 tanker bans running from Alaska through to Washington every year.
Right.
Yet we're not going to stop that. So from my perspective, I think that sit down with and bring the Indigenous people in as part of the conversation, part of the solution, versus being part of the problem.